Lakewood Shores had always lived under the protection of its towering trees, old pines, oaks, and willows that lined the edge of the lake like guardians. They stood through storms, winds, and decades of seasons, their roots gripping the soil as if holding the land together. Everyone who had lived there long enough understood one simple truth: the trees were not decoration, they were defense. But the new HOA board didn't care for old truths. Brenda Marston, the newly elected HOA president, stood in front of the community meeting with a bright, confident smile and a slide titled, "A Clearer View, A Better Future." She pointed toward an edited image of the neighborhood with the trees removed and the lake shining without obstruction. "These trees block the beauty of our lake," she said. "We deserve an open view, a modern look. Once we clear them, every home will gain value." Most people nodded, carried away by the dream of sparkling water and increased property prices. Only one voice rose against her, Ethan Reyes. "Those trees are the only thing keeping the wind out," he said. "You cut them, you expose every house on this side of the lake." Brenda gave a polite, dismissive laugh. "It's just wind, Ethan. The storms here aren't small," he insisted. "Ask anyone who lived here before 2002, before those trees got this tall." "We've already made the decision," Brenda replied. And with that, the meeting ended. Within a week, chainsaws screamed across the neighborhood. One by one, the trees fell. People watched from their porches, some excited for the new view, some uneasy. Ethan stood with his arms crossed as another 100-year-old pine collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. By the end of the third day, the entire tree line was gone. Where a wall of green had stood for generations, now there was nothing but open sky and a wide, glittering lake. Brenda walked the cleared stretch proudly, hands on her hips. "Look at that view," she said to no one in particular. But to Ethan, the view looked wrong. Exposed. Fragile. 2 weeks passed. The weather began to shift. Early signals of the seasonal winds that always rushed across the lake. Without the trees, they now had nothing to slow them down. At night, the houses closest to the water vibrated with the force of sudden gusts. Loose items rolled across porches. A few fences leaned forward as if bowing to something powerful and unseen. People complained. Brenda called them overreacting. But the winds grew stronger. Clouds gathered over the lake, low and heavy. The surface of the water darkened, rippling as waves pushed harder and harder toward the shore. Ethan noticed how the air changed. Sharp, pressurized, carrying that deep humming sound the lake made before a serious storm. And then, just before dusk one evening, the first violent burst of wind slammed into the neighborhood like a giant's hand. And the houses nearest the lake shuddered. Shingles tore loose. Outdoor furniture lifted. The newly exposed soil where the trees once stood kicked up like dust in a storm. Inside her home, Brenda looked out at the lake as the sky turned colder, darker, heavier. The open view she had fought for now looked like a wide doorway for something dangerous rushing straight toward them. And the winds began to rise again, louder, stronger, shaking the glass of every window on the lakeside. The storm did not begin with rain. It began with sound. A deep, building roar rolled across the lake like the growl of something waking up. The open water carried it straight into Lakewood Shores with nothing left to break its momentum. Houses closest to the lake trembled as if the sound itself pressed against them. Inside his living room, Ethan stood with his phone in hand, staring out the window. The trees had always muffled this noise. Without them, the storm felt too close, like it was already inside the neighborhood. A sudden blast of wind hit the side of his house. The windows rattled. The front door shook in its frame. Ethan's stomach tightened. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. Across the street, Mark, Brenda's vice president, struggled to close his patio doors as gusts shoved at them with surprising force. The lake view he once admired now looked like a dark, churning creature. He grabbed his phone and called Brenda. She answered breathlessly, "Mark, I'm dealing with something right now. My patio door almost ripped off its hinges." "Brenda, what is happening?" "It's just wind," she snapped, but her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. A loud crash came through Mark's end of the call. He dropped the phone and ran toward the sound. His backyard fence had collapsed completely, flattened as if something huge had rolled over it. Pieces of wood littered the grass, scattered like matchsticks. And the wind was still rising. On the lake's edge, the first porch roof gave way. It tore upward with a shriek, lifted by the storm like a sheet of paper. The homeowners, the Garcias, screamed and dove back into their living room as debris flew over the water. Another gust hit. The newly exposed shoreline, soft from the uprooted trees, began to crumble. Chunks of soil tumbled into the lake one after another. The ground was literally disappearing. Their dog barked hysterically as the windows rattled with every new gust. "This is bad, Mrs. Garcia said, her voice shaking. "We need to call the HOA." "Forget the HOA, Mr. Garcia replied. "We need to call Ethan." Ethan's phone rang nonstop. Neighbors, friends, people he barely knew. They were all saying the same thing. You were right. He could hear the panic in their voices, roofs lifting, fences breaking, windows bowing inward under pressure. Every house that faced the lake now stood naked against a force they were never built to withstand. He threw on a jacket and stepped outside, bracing himself as the wind shoved against him hard enough to stagger. The air was full of flying leaves, bits of mulch, fragments of shingles. The lake itself looked furious, waves smacking the shore so aggressively that water sprayed across the street. Down the block, Ethan saw something that made him stop cold. A massive pine stump, one of the trees cut down, had been ripped from the ground entirely. The roots, raw and exposed, dangled like the remains of a giant pulled from the earth. The wind had dragged it several feet. If the trees had still been there, they would have stood firm. They would have taken this beating instead of the houses. Brenda stood in her living room clutching her curtains like she could somehow hold the storm back. Her windows bowed inward, bending subtly but terrifyingly. The floor vibrated, her chandelier swayed, the lake's roar filled every corner of her home. Then something slammed against her house. Hard, her breath caught, the impact echoed through the walls like a hammer strike. She forced herself to look out the window, and a wave of panic surged through her. Pieces of her neighbor's roof were scattered across her front yard. A section of fencing rolled across the street like a brittle tumbleweed. A trash bin tumbled end over end, smashing into her mailbox. Her perfect view, her cleared horizon, now looked like a battlefield. The storm howled again, louder, angrier. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and dialed Ethan. When he answered, she could barely hear her own voice over the wind. Ethan, you need to help us. Please. The houses. Something's wrong. Everything's. The line crackled with static, then cut off. Outside, the wind surged again with enough force to knock Ethan to his knees. The houses nearest the lake shook violently. A street sign ripped free and slammed into a parked car, shattering a window. Loose shingles flew through the air like blades. The storm rolled in harder, louder, faster. And the neighborhood, stripped of its natural defense, braced for a force it had never been meant to face. The winds gathered themselves, rising with a low, monstrous howl. And then struck Lakewood Shores with full power as the night swallowed the last of the daylight.